had just like kind of general questions about tidy data. Do you mind maybe just kind of like reiterating those so we can kind of start from there?
Yeah, so I watched the tidy data video several times, and I feel like the general, or the very specifics of like what's being talked about and everything is very clear.
Yep.
So I'm pretty sure what's happening, but kind of my big questions are like, why is it better? And you'd said at one point in the video, like, you may be asking why, and then I think you gave the specific example of, so that you only have to type in 3 variables instead of all 25 or something like that. Yeah. And then like, and how, so it's like, why is it better? How is it better? What a data set should be tidied based on, and then when to tidy data or what to tidy it for. That might be the same thing. And then I think it's what I think I'm missing, and I think you're sharing, but it's not making a connection for me, is kind of the principles of tidy data. And so like what they mean, and like how would I spot a violation? Because like in the solutions video, you talked about a violation of number 3, but I wasn't following. Okay. So that might be way more than what you were hoping I was going to ask, but that's the big picture.
Well, I mean, I think the first thing to say is, okay, there's nothing like inherently better about tidy data. I mean, it's better if you're working with the tidyverse, which is, as you know, I think you know at this point, that's the approach that I think is best for people learning and for people who are more advanced with R. You know, obviously the tidy in tidyverse comes from that. And it just allows you to, well, first of all, there's certain things you won't be able to do. So you'll even see, for example, if you haven't gotten, well, no, you wouldn't have gotten to it unless you've gone ahead. There's a lesson in the advanced Dataviz section that talks about working, using tidy data, and shows, for example, how you can't plot something unless, I shouldn't say you can't. You can always like come find hacks, right? But like it's so much easier to plot data if it's in a tidy format than if it's in generally. There are a number of ways that data can be untidy, but generally I focus on like kind of wide data versus long data, because that's like the easiest and most common way I'd say that you see data not being tidy. And
I'm very used to wide data, where it's very much like an individual has one row or a school has one row, and you might have a ton of different columns just describing that single observation. And
right.
So that anchoring may be a big part of what's holding me back from understanding the conception of, hey, but there's this other way of looking at it, and then it's better in these situations, or what it can do.
Yeah, let me, if it's okay, I'm gonna put my screen up and show you what I think will be a good example. And this is actually less about long versus wide and more just about tidying and specifically thinking about the concept of what your unit of analysis is. So let me actually bring it up and show you. Where was that? So I don't know if you remember in the very beginning of the very first session, I had folks just fill out before that like a pre-survey that asked people to, you know, tell me who you are, like a little bit about you. So let me actually, you know, I don't actually need that data. Let me. Just so the data actually lives on, it's in a Google Sheet. So I'm actually, this right here is just running code that is importing data from a Google Sheet.
All right.
Okay, so let me, so let's look at one of the questions I asked you there were like 2 or 3 questions that were like, what do you use now? What, what are you looking to kind of move on from in order to start using R? So I asked, like, what do you use for Dataviz, for example? And so, at this point, like this data is in the format that you talked about, where it's right now it's 1 row per respondent. But if we want to, for example, count like, what's the most common tool that people use for, we can even take this one. This is just about data analysis. What we'd actually care about there, we don't, because an individual respondent can give more than 1 response. So we care there about separating out those responses. And so actually, let me just open a, just copy this in here. So if I even take my survey pre, so if I want to think about working with this, like the nature of the structure of your data can change depending on the question you're answering, right? So like if I want here to say, what's the most common tool, I would probably use separate rows, because I need to take this column, but I need each response to be its own row. Does that make sense?
I understand, like, but why do you need it to be a separate row? Why, I mean, couldn't it just be wider with then just making everything dichotomous and be like, okay, there's 6 different software programs that are used, just dummy code all for all those. What's the advantage of doing it the other way?
Well, that's a great question. Let me actually do it both ways and show you. Let me actually save this, so then I'll have this code for you later if you want to take a look back at it. I'll just call this Matt. Okay, so let's see. If I want to do this, I could do separate rows. What software do you currently use? I'll set my separator to be a comma and then a space.
And the separate rows, is that something we've learned?
So I showed it in a live session. I don't think it was actually in the lessons. It was not this past week, but the week before that is when I demonstrated. Actually, sorry, it may have been, take a look at the discussion forum, because I think we didn't quite get to it in the live session. So I just recorded a video afterwards and opened, I think Charlie created a thread.
It would be a live session for the tidy week.
Yeah, exactly. So not this past week, but the week before that.
Okay. Yeah, because I haven't gotten that far yet, because I kind of got stuck on the first 2 videos.
Sure, no problem. Well, it'll be there whenever you want. Okay, so what I did is I separated. Let me actually, just for simplicity, only select that row. So you can see if I run that, now I have, well, it's slightly confusing because like this response, I left it totally open-ended. So like that response, is not really, if the data is not perfect, let me just say that. But if I do a count, that like after I've separated it into rows, so I have on each row a single observation that is the tool, not the respondent. Now I have this, and I could just do an arrange by that.
Yeah, I'm not following. I'm not keeping up with what you're doing.
Okay, let me let me just finish it and then I'll.
Sure.
Okay, so I have my survey pre.
Yeah.
And I really only care, for demonstration purposes, I just care about this column here.
Yeah, just so if the question is what's the most frequently used software program,
yep.
I'm following that.
Okay, So I just selected, so I'll just run it line by line. I selected that column just for simplicity so I could do that. Then what I realized I needed to do is, okay, because people can give multiple responses, I need to separate cases where they have multiple responses. And what I see is that for the most part, whenever there's a comma, that means there's a new response.
Yeah.
So I'm using separate rows, and with separate rows, you have to give it the column. So I think the argument is call. I'm not actually naming it, but I can if I want to be explicit. And I'm saying from this column, separate rows using that separator. So now, wait, is that not the argument name? Hold on one second. Let me. Oh no, I guess I don't give it. I don't think you actually named that. You just.
And so by separate rows, like I understand that it's taking, you know, oh, if it's R, comma, SPSS, but what does it mean to separate them? Like, is it just acknowledging that the response has multiple items in it? I don't know that I follow what
yeah. Well, let me do this then. Let me add, so we don't have any kind of like ID on the response, but let me just add an ID so you can see what happens when I run separate rows. So it's obviously one ID per respondent. So now when I do separate rows, let's ignore 1 and 2 because they're kind of weird. Yeah. But like, look at these 2 lines. So this is a single person. We know it's a single person because they put the ID is 4. Yeah. But they have 2 responses. So they have Excel and Tableau as their 2 responses.
Got it. So now it's no longer each ID has 1 row. It's going to be multiple. Got it.
Exactly.
Multiple
and that's kind of like what I'm trying to demonstrate in terms of like what makes this tidy. What actually, because our unit of analysis here is not respondents, it's instead responses. By the principles of tidy data, we need each observation in that unit of analysis to be its own line, to not be in an individual, like in multiple observations within a single cell is what we're trying to get away from.
Okay.
And by doing that, what it allows us to do is now I can do a count. So it's going to count unique observations within those responses. And you can see, for example,
Excel.
32 people chose Excel. Yep. And then just for simplicity, I just arranged it in descending order so we can see, okay, 32 people Excel, 13 SPSS, 6 Stata, etc. So let me show you what this would look like if you did it in a wide format, and how you would do that. Well, first of all, did that make sense? Do you have other questions on this?
So for me, the big take home that I feel like is new from this that I wasn't picking up when I was watching your videos or doing the readings was that by tidy, it's by responses that you're interested in looking at right now and not by respondents.
Yeah.
Like I feel like, because I was really stuck on some of the reading parts where it's this has 3 variables when there's 8 columns. I'm like, well, what do you mean it has 3 variables? There's 8 columns there. I'm just getting stuck. And then it's like, because it's about the response that you care about.
Right.
And so that's where I feel like I'm getting stuck a little bit, because normally it's like dummy coded in the data set. I think even in the examples, it's like dummy coded by like race and ethnicity or something. And it's like, no, you want that to be tidy when instead of the 5 or 6 race and ethnicity categories, you want it to really be long, but only just to say like race ethnicity is 1 column.
Right. Exactly.
And so like I understand it conceptually. It's just that like I'm not quite understanding. Like I still don't know. For me, again, maybe just because I'm stuck of like, why is that better or preferred?
Yeah. Well, let me show you what the alternative is, and then you can decide. So how we would do.
Yeah, and I'm trying to be like, I guess I'm not trying to be, I guess, not defensive isn't the word, or isn't the right word, because like, tidy's super popular, and people who spend their lives doing data analysis say it's better. So I'm like, it's one of those like, I believe you, but I want to understand.
No,
when I'm doing it, then it's like, they're like, yes, this is the better way. I don't want to like fight and say, well, this is the way I've always done it, so I have to keep doing it this way.
Right.
Hasn't clicked yet of like why this is better than the way I've been doing it.
No, I think that's great, because again, like I said in the beginning, I think these are the questions that other people have, but you're articulating them. So I think it's great. So let me show you what this would look like if we're doing it in a like the kind of dummy coding thing you talked about. So to do that, just conceptually, what we need to do is we need to say, if anywhere in this variable we find the text Excel, then create a column, a variable called Excel.
Yeah.
And if we find it, code it 1 or Y or yes, or whatever. Otherwise, 0.
Yeah, I'm learning we don't want it to be 1 or 0, I think, because when I'm trying to make my data visualizations and all of my existing data was in a double, and like, no, it's harder when it's a double instead of a character.
Yeah, and that's actually, well, sort of relevant here. Remind me what tool you use previously or now, mostly SPSS or?
I frankly, I haven't been using much at all. I've used SPSS a bunch in the past. I've used Excel a bunch in the past. I tried to use JASP, which is a new kind of open source, trying to be that middle ground between SPSS and R. But I haven't been using much. I've been collaborating with people who live and breathe R, and life happens a lot faster and more efficiently when you find collaborators who can lean into their expertise.
Of course. Well, I ask because that way of coding, with 1 and 0 and value labels is pretty common among people who are coming from SPSS, which is why I was wondering if that was the case. But yes, you're right. In R, if I were doing this, I would just code it Y and N, which is actually what I'll do here. All right, so I'm going to make a new column called uses Excel equals, I'll do an if else, which we set up a condition. So we need to say, if anywhere in that column we find the text Excel, then yes, otherwise no. Okay. So the way that we do that, and I don't think this is, unless you've just found it on your own, this isn't anything you would have found. We use str_detect, which is a way just to find a text pattern. And so I'm saying str_detect Excel. And if we find that, then yes, otherwise no.
All right.
So let me run that. And you can see now, if I go across here, okay, perfect. That one worked. You can see that works.
Yeah.
So then I could pretty much just replicate this for like Tableau. I could do the same thing for SPSS.
Yeah, so I'm starting to see now it's like it's a lot more code.
It is a lot more code, definitely.
But in my mind, it's one of those like, I'm not thinking when I'm making this code because it's repetition. So it's very easy. It's easy code for me, at least right now.
Yep.
But that's where I see the advantage.
Yep. So yes, I would definitely say for me, like the reason, and I was totally in the same spot as you in the beginning. I was like, what's the point of just thinking in this tidy way? Like I can do it other ways. I mean, obviously I do believe, for me at least, working in the tidy format is better. It's simpler. You're right. Like this forces you to copy and paste. And I think there are a couple of issues with that. one, I mean, it's, it's more labor intensive, but two, I think you're more likely to make copy paste errors.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, I might copy this and let's say I want to make one called JASP, but I forget to change the text here.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to have a column that says uses JASP, and I'm going to think it's right, but in fact it's not.
Yeah.
So that is one reason. But the other thing is now, like, I have to, if I want, okay, let's think, like, how do I want to kind of count this? And let's see.
Oh yeah, this is the problem of then becoming, you count the Y's in each column.
Right. Well, so I would say like group by, or no, I don't even want to summarize, uses Excel count equals sum of, or no, sorry, it's not sum. Wait, hold on. See, I don't work in this way at all. Okay,
yeah.
So can I use that within a summarize? I don't know that I can. Like, because what I actually need to do, no, that doesn't work.
It's like create a table of all the yeses and nos if you wanted.
Yeah. But I don't actually care. Like, it's, in other words, I don't care. Like, well, at least when I hear table, I think of like a frequency table. So looking at, the interactions between multiple variables, where in fact, I just really care, like, what percentage of people say use Excel, or what number, whatever, use Excel. And so, yeah, I'd have to, I think maybe I would use some kind of like a cross function. Sorry, someone's at my door. Can you give me just 1 second?
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, so I mean, I'd have to think about like the best way to do this. But the other thing is, by doing it this way, I would see this code as brittle. And what I mean by brittle is it works in cases where I know all of the potential responses. But if someone comes in and says, I use SAS and I haven't listed it here, or some other tool I've never even heard of and wouldn't even think to code.
Yeah.
There's no way I'm going to be able to do that. Whereas with this, I mean, just to show you, okay, there are all the responses. I'm going to do something where I manually add a row. Oh no, SAS isn't, I'll call it DK stats. So just to show you, what I did is I just manually added a row at the bottom, just to show you that this will work. Oh wait, I need to give it n equals, or no, that's
you need the ID. Yeah.
ID equals, I don't know, I'll just make it 50 or whatever. So now if I do this, DK stats is going to show up as one of my options. Whereas if I do this, it's not going to show up, right? Because it's only going to work if I, know that DK beforehand, that DK stats is an option. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the kind of brute line long way isn't going to be helpful unless you really know all of your data, and then that's going to be hopefully rare, because with R, it's supposed to help you get to that stage. Exactly. If it truly is open-ended.
Yep. So I think that, just to summarize, I think when you get your data in tidy format, it tends to be a bit more concise. Your code does less copying and pasting, which can lead to fewer errors, but it's also more flexible and allows you to, adjust, or not even adjust, like you don't have to do anything. It'll just capture responses based on whatever people give you, as opposed to having to kind of predetermine what's going to be counted and what's not going to be counted.
Okay, so I think I'm understanding more about why it's better, how it's better, And then I'm just going through my questions that I'd sent you.
Yep.
What a data set should be tidied on, that depends on what your question is.
Exactly.
Right?
And it can vary like from question to question. Like if I cared about how many people responded versus, or, gave blanks on that, like that's a question at the level of the respondent, not the response. So yeah, it can vary. So sorry, I interrupted you, but I just wanted to make sure that we got that.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. I think that's one thing that I wasn't catching up on from the videos or the reading was that I might tidy my data 9 different ways, depending on what I'm trying to do with it. It's not like it's you have your data set, you tidy, and that's where maybe I forget where in the process, like the sequence of things was talking about how you tidy your data before you start your analyses. But I was viewing tidying it as this like one-time thing that you just do, like clean names, where it's you do it at the beginning and then it's kind of done. But it's not that at all, because it's really how you tidy or what you tidy is going to be based on what you're trying to do with it.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, sometimes it depends like how complex what you're trying to do is. Let me actually show you an example of a project that I'm actually working on right now. It's all public data. So this is actually my code where I am bringing in data and just tidying it all. So I'm producing reports about childhood bereavement, kind of a sad topic, but and I have data that they shared with me. Let me even run it down to here. So I just imported it. This is the all data raw. And so this data that they shared with me has 3 separate things. It has data about the under or 0 to 24 population, the amount or the percent and ratio of children or youth who experience childhood bereavement. And then it also has leading causes of death for different, at different ages. And so this one was actually, it took a bit of work, as you can see.
Yeah.
But it was pretty straightforward to get it. Like the data I knew that I wanted, for example, here's population under 25. I could get it. Okay, I know I have like a group variable, a race, ethnicity. Is it Hispanic, Latino, which I need as ethnicity later on, or is it a race variable? Abbreviations I knew I was going to use in some of my visualizations. Location is state or national. And then the population, the number, and then the percent. And so I actually, like in this case, I actually did exactly what you said you don't always have to do, which is true. But in some cases, it is kind of as simple as that. And honestly, in the lessons I put together for the Going Deeper course, I just want a pretty simple example to demonstrate some concepts. So I did make it probably simpler than it often is. But that you're right. Like you don't have to just do it all in one shot and then have it. It really does. It can depend. It can vary within a project, and it ultimately just depends on the questions that you're asking.
Yeah, because I could also see some based on what you do with one, if you create an analysis or a data visualization, that then informs another question that you want to look at. So then you'd have to tidy it to answer that subsequent follow-up question.
Right, exactly. Actually go back to here.
So just to make sure, the last kind of question I'd had, and maybe now that I kind of understand some of this, it'll be clearer from the reading and the videos, is about like this, the principles of tidying data. And so is that where it's the taking thing, like is that really just based primarily on what you're trying to answer? I don't know how to articulate this because I want to make sure I'm understanding the big concept and not just being able to repeat and mimic what I see you do in the video.
Yeah. I mean, I think the very first thing is to think about what's my unit of analysis, and do I have one row per observation based on that unit of analysis? Because like this survey data was a perfect example where, you know, the data that we had starting out doesn't match the data that we would need, or the structure that we would need to answer a question about responses. It works fine for respondents.
So you want, so first thing to think of, what's my unit of analysis? You want one row for that unit of analysis? Is that what you said?
Per observation. So in this case, our unit of observation is response, which is why we needed to use, you know, in this case, separate rows to get our data into that response. Make one row a response, not a respondent.
So you want one row per observation.
Yep.
So I'm trying to understand, like I'm trying to tear out, because when I hear observation, I think of each student is an observation. And I feel like I'm getting stuck on that, and I'm not switching to, but for here, you mean an observation is whether or not an individual said they have used Excel or SPSS.
Yeah, exactly. So I would use observation flexibly to just be like, what an observation is totally dependent on what your unit of analysis is. Sorry, I'm going to put on my headphones because they're very loud out there.
Right.
All right. So like, there's nothing sacred about respondent being a unit, being my observation, or response being my observation.
Okay.
It's only that I use, in this case, like what my question was, you know, what's the most common tool that people use? And to answer that question, I need the unit of observation is the response, not the respondent. And so that's why I needed those to be on each response to be on its own individual row.
But it's not just response, it's the type, it's the option almost of response, because it's not just the response of like, oh, I said Excel and SPSS. It's the each individual response option.
Yeah, I guess I was using response to mean precisely that, to mean each option.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I should think of a better way to articulate it, but yeah, like an individual, well, I shouldn't say individual response, because you could interpret that to mean an individual respondent.
Yeah.
But yes, it's like the individual tool, because the question is what tool is most common. And so I need to have each row be a single tool.
I think I'm getting it. I'm just not sure how well I would transfer to like a different question or something if I want to make sure that I'm conceptually getting it. So like in my data that I work often with, it's with schools that are within school districts, or students that are within schools, or students that are within classes within schools. And so, you know, it can get really, you know, it's all nested. And so if I wanted to know like how many schools were still offering online or hybrid learning opportunities. Mm-hmm. And so then there I would want to tidy it based on possibly they're fully in person, they're hybrid, or they're fully remote.
Right, so exactly.
So that would be what I would be tidying on. So
Mm-hmm.
then each school would potentially have 3 rows, but or potentially one if they were just all in person and that's it. They would just say, in person, or would they all have 3 rows?
What are your 3 rows? What do you mean the 3 rows?
The 3 rows of being like, if I wanted to know what type of school are they offering now, with the potential options being fully in person, hybrid, or fully remote.
So I would make that a single variable. I would call that variable like instruction status or something like that. And the responses are what would be hybrid, fully in person, hybrid, or remote. So in other words, in that data set, I would have like, I don't know if you have like a school ID variable, then a school variable, like a school name, then in that case, instructional status or something. That's how I would structure that. I don't think it would be rows. I think each row would be a school.
Okay. So when would it be like, I'm trying to think of, so when to tidy? I feel like where I'm stuck on.
What does your data look like? Do you have, if you have data, we could put it up on the screen.
My data is so kind of artificial. Like it's all just kind of like, it's real data, but it's not like I've got a specific, like, I want to get this done.
Yeah.
Other than like, if it was an easy data set to then use to try to learn off.
Sure.
And so I often report things like based on race, ethnicity, like gifted identification rates, which vary a lot based on things like race, ethnicity, or gender, or whether or not they receive free and reduced lunch. And those are often like many columns if it's like reported based on by school.
Right. Yeah, so in your example, I do think it's hard to say without seeing the data, but like from what I hear you saying, I think you would have something where it was like, you'd have one table, one data frame that would be school information. And importantly, it would have a school ID variable, because that's what you would then use, and then you'd also have like, say, a student data frame. And in that student data frame, they would also have that school ID variable that they're associated with, so that if you ever need to do joins to figure out like, okay, what percentage of African-American students are in schools with hybrid learning, for example, just to make something up, you would obviously need data from the school data frame, but also from the student data frame to get that demographic data. And so a lot of time, like the example that I showed you a minute ago with the childhood bereavement data, it came in a single Excel spreadsheet. And the very first thing I did was split it into 3 data frames so I can work with the individual data frames separately. I didn't have anything in that case where I needed to like join them back up. But as long as you keep that variable, then you can have them in a tidy format, work, really concisely, like I showed in the example, but then also using joins, connect things in the future in order to, do different types of analyses. Does that help? Does that make sense? Yeah.
And that's where there's going to be plenty of data sets that I work with that are going to have, school as the unit level versus student within the unit level, but then each student is within a school. And so to be able to go back and forth, to be able to make some reference, because the school data frames may have things like what percent of kids are on free and reduced lunch.
Right.
So then but at the student level, I may care about that at the school level, because it may be different if you're a student who's on free and reduced lunch in a school that is 100% free and reduced lunch versus you're like the only kid on free and reduced lunch.
Right, exactly.
And so that's where I may care about the school level data for the individual student.
Exactly. And I think just the thing with having your data in tidy format is it gives you really nice flexibility also then to do that joining and, do analysis at different levels in ways that my experience has been, if I don't tidy my data before, then each time I want to do a join like that or something, like I actually spend a bunch of time figuring out, okay, what's the best way to do this? Whereas if my data is already in that tidy format, then it's pretty obvious, at least it's more obvious, like how I would join things to do that type of analysis.
Okay. And I feel like that's where maybe I just need to go back and watch the videos and read it again now to see if it's like clicking of like, how would I tidy something? Like if I know the question of like, this is the question, how do I tidy it?
Right. I mean, it's like hard.
Yeah, I just feel like I'm not quite clear on that yet conceptually, but maybe just with some practice and seeing some examples, I'll be able to feel more solid on that.
Hold on one second. I think I might be able to.
I mean, and I can show you the data, and I've got my data set. It's in my GitHub.
Oh, okay. Here, I'm going to post an example in the chat of someone named Charlotte Gelfen working through how to tidy, just like a walkthrough of how she tidied some data. I'll say it's decently complex, but it'll just show you some examples. It's also from a couple of years ago, so there's something. Well, I can even see, for example, you'll see a function called gather, which has been replaced by pivot longer. Yeah, hopefully it'll kind of give you a sense. Yeah, if you want to, actually, do you have a link to your GitHub?
Yeah, so I'm trying to figure out where I should look. I'm trying to think of what to link, because I know I've shared for my assignment for the GitHub, but I don't know. I'm looking at my repositories. Like what should I link you, or is it projects? What should I link you to?
The repository itself.
Okay, I'm gonna find course project, I think is it. So I'll put that in the chat. So I think this is the one that I shared with you and Charlie. I'm trying to see.
Oh yeah, yeah, it is. I just actually had not accepted the invitation, which I will do now. Oh wait, it said I must have missed that. It said it expired. So can you actually invite me again?
This is a great, okay, so I'm in the project.
So go to, what is it, settings?
Yeah, settings, let's see, manage access.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I want to add people. Your
DG cuz.
DG?
Mm-hmm.
There you are. Okay, I just added you.
Okay.
And so I've actually been playing with something Charlie's been helping me with, because this is a state of North Carolina. It's all public access. I actually just before the course started pulled a few data sets together manually, and so added some columns, but it's 115 school districts in North Carolina, and like how big they are, how many students they have, how many schools they have, how many Title I schools they have, and like what % of kids they identify as gifted is most of the data. But since then, because that with 115 different school districts, like making things like tables and bar graphs is just messy, because no one really wants to look at something with 115. And so the state groups them into 8 regions. And so since I turned this assignment in, I've added to this, but I haven't updated or pushed it to GitHub yet to be able to do some of this where it's instead of just by school district, it can also be by region. And my spidey sense tells me there's something to tidy this on if it's rather than, because right now it's just one column and then it says it's one row for each school district. And then in the one column, it's like, what region are you? And there's 8 different regions.
I see. Here, let me put my screen up. And you feel free to stop me if this is stuff you've already done. But what I did is I pulled the project so I have it locally. And now I'm just gonna, wait, I need to load my packages, and then I'm just going to import the data. And let me just take a look at it first of all. Okay, so to be honest, I don't think there's an, I think this is actually pretty tidy. Like I don't see things here that I would, what's this, what's ADM?
That's the number of total students who are enrolled in that school district. It's average daily.
Oh, I see. Yeah. And what's AIG?
That's the number of gifted kids that are in the district.
Okay. I mean, if you, so if you had like number of students in, April 2021, as well as in, September of 2021, and those were in 2 columns, and I would definitely tidy that. But
so
I don't
tidy it to just be like student enrollment, and then
exactly.
Okay, and so then most would have 2 rows then, and then but if I only had it for partial, then some might only have 1 row.
Not quite. It's not that it would have rows. So if here, let me keep this up. If we had 2 there, I would, because in this column there are a couple things going on. It's showing us the number of students, but it's also showing us the date. And so we want to separate that into distinct variables. So I would have 3 columns. I would have a, what is it, school district? Yeah, school district, then date, then number of students.
Got it.
Columns.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not going to be rows, it's going to be columns, but the same,
Okay.
I think that the same kind of thing that you were thinking.
Okay. So what about, so I've got things like, I feel like this is pretty wide. Like the first 3 are just the total number of schools in the district. And then it's the number of Title I schools. And then it's just the percent of schools that are Title I, which is just,
Right.
Title I divided by total.
Right.
That feels wide
To
me.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because you're not like thinking about, kind of the rules of tidy data. Every column is a variable, right? Like number of total schools, number of title schools, that's fine. Every row is an observation. So, we don't have like, I don't even know what that would look like, 2 school districts on a row or something like that. Or we don't have, for example, Cherokee Central Schools, 3,0, where 3 means total schools and 0 means Title I schools, something like that.
Okay.
And every cell is a single value. So I actually think it's totally fine. You could separate it out and have like a Title I data frame or something like that, but I don't think it's really necessary.
And so in the data, I've added, or will add, another column, which is just which region. And there's 8 regions. And so if I wanted to say, is there a difference in like the proportion of Title I schools based on region? Or is there a difference based on AIG count, like the percent of kids they identify as gifted based on region?
Yeah.
Would I then want to tidy it based on region? Because then the region column is still pretty clean because it's just one piece of information.
I wouldn't, because then what you can do, if you have that column, you can just do a group by region and do some kind of summarizing after that.
Okay.
So yeah, that's tidy. Like that's already tidy. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about it.
Okay. So that's helpful for this data set, but the problem is, as a researcher, I've got 90 different data sets that I'll be working with next year.
Right. Well, I would say for you, like maybe even bring in, like this one looks pretty straightforward.
Okay.
So maybe look through some of your other data and see if there's something else you could bring in to try to tidy, and then ask, what questions you have as you go through that process on that particular data frame or data.
Yeah, because I actually have another data set. It's from a paper that I've already published. And I, came up with the idea, wrote the survey, collected the data, but then had somebody else who did the analysis, who did it in R, but not in tidy. They did it in base R. And so what I'm trying to do is, like, we've got tables and we've got a bunch of figures in it. Right. And so I've been slowly hoping that this data set was going to be my big project. Yeah. But that then by the end of the course that I'd be able to then go and recreate the figures and the tables and the analyses from this other data set, which is much more complicated than this one.
I see.
But I've been postponing that a little bit because, like, just doing the R course with this is consuming more time than I was hoping it would. And so my added bonus of, like, can I do this as a real goal? I just haven't had a chance to really get there.
Okay.
But I think that's going to have a lot more, because it's got we asked a bunch of different questions and question types where we have to merge. You don't care. But I'll have to, that might be where I need the help.
Yeah. I mean, I think data tidying, it's both art and science. So, it'll partly just depend on, like, doing it a bunch of times. And I feel, I'm so much better at doing it now than I was before. But there are times when I know my data isn't fully tidy and I'm like, whatever, like, I can work with it in this way and it's just not worth the effort. So I don't think you need to be 100% dogmatic with it. But
we just hear all these lines like, it's 80% cleaning your data and 20% everything else. So it's I want to take this seriously. And while I've got, like, you and Charlie has been great when I go with very specific, like, I'm trying to do this. Do it. And I know that level of help isn't going to be around in January. So I'm really trying to make sure I cover my bases as much as possible while I have access to you both.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's great. That's what we're here for.